Welcome to the Barbell Strategy Podcast,
where we talk about coaching,
training,
and all things strength and conditioning
to help the fitness athlete,
CrossFitter, and the coach. Please share and enjoy.
Sam, do you remember your secret training methods that you used to do at uni outside of your CrossFit training?
Extra on top of CrossFit, when it was bodybuilding in the morning at David Lloyd, adding in every possible exercise just because, followed by CrossFit in the evening. High volume method.
What was the breakdown? It was just like 5 sets of 10 of 10 different exercises, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was, when I first started CrossFit, it was definitely 5 sets of 10, and I probably had 2 or 3 different sessions that I would rotate through, all of them full body, all of them loads of volume. And if I saw a new exercise that I liked the look of, I'd just add it in instead of taking out another one. But I was a student, I had the time, mate. And at 18, 19, you can get away with it, hey? If I tried to do that now, I'd probably last about 2 weeks and then something would break.
And then you would come to CrossFit in the evening and spend half an hour just trying to get into squat depth.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection that perhaps the reason I couldn't get to squat depth was because I'd spent all morning doing more squats, lunges, deadlifts, all that kind of stuff. But then you persuaded me to actually start doing something that wasn't sets of 10, and I started to get a little bit stronger as opposed to just bigger. It's quite useful. Good tip, mate.
Well,
thanks.
in your defence,
yeah,
I do remember. I think when I was doing, James Fitzgerald did say, OPT did say that the best background that you can have, or the best athletic history you can have for CrossFit, is just bodybuilding with a lot of aerobic work, because you're getting a lot of training volume in. So it may have worked out, but anyway,
and that's why I could just go and broke on everything, and you kept having to rest.
It's strategic pacing, mate. All right, saving myself for those heavy lifts. But anyway, let's get into this episode. So, welcome to our first episode of the Barbell Strategy Podcast. I'm Luke, and joined by Sam. So, we decided to start up this podcast because we are seasoned coaches with lots of experience, and a funny little backstory. We actually started CrossFit sort of very much at a similar time. We went to the same university. We actually lived together for a little bit, and then our paths took us in different directions. And now it's gone a little bit full circle, and we're going to be doing
back together, baby.
Yeah, we're going to be doing this podcast, and we're going to be talking about coaching, strength and conditioning, obviously within the realm of CrossFit, but sort of trying to give you guys a bit of a different perspective and trying to sort of bring in some new ideas which might be a little bit outside of CrossFit, but things that are going to be that we find interesting within strength and conditioning, within weightlifting, within movement and rehab, and those types of things. So what we're going to do to start off with is we will go through a little bit of just a backstory on ourselves and our coaching, because most likely the people who are listening to episode 1 probably know one of us but don't know the other person. So here you can actually start to get to know the person that you know out of one of us two a little bit better, and then you can hear the other person's story as well. So Sam, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, why not? So I guess ever since I was a kid, I've always been into sport. Played a lot of rugby growing up. So then I first started coaching when I was 18. I was working at David Lloyd, started out as a lifeguard, and then transitioned into the gym. So I guess that was my first introduction to coaching classes, taking the typical circuits, boot camp, all that kind of stuff. Solid. And then from there, I started my sports science degree. So I did that. That was my first degree. And then off the back, whilst I was at uni, that's when I found CrossFit. I'd not long since stopped playing rugby. I met the legendary Rosie Plowman in the gym at David Lloyd. She persuaded me to go down to CrossFit Leeds to try it out. I was very much not up for it. I was quite happy in David Lloyd doing my bodybuilding, as we were speaking about earlier. So she dragged me along, and then I went. The first class was Helen, so it couldn't have been a better workout for me with running, kettlebell swings and pull-ups. I think I won. I beat everybody in the class, even with strict pull-ups, and I think that then persuaded me to keep going, because I thought, I'm not too bad at this, and that competitive instinct in me enjoyed the winning as much as the workout. So that's how I got into CrossFit, and obviously stayed at CrossFit Leeds throughout my time at uni, and then towards the end of my final year I started helping out with some of the classes, started doing intros, things like that. So then once I graduated, then I started coaching at CrossFit Leeds full time, which was a really good experience. Obviously Mike's a great person to learn from when it comes to coaching and running a gym and running classes. So that was good. And then from there I went out to Abu Dhabi, spent a year in Abu Dhabi, and then came back to the UK and did my master's degree. So I did a master's in strength and conditioning in Chester. And then whilst I was there, I was coaching at CrossFit Chester for a little bit as well. How
did the sports science degree and your strength and conditioning degree, do you think that's influenced you a lot in your coaching? Because I suppose, especially when we started CrossFit, it wasn't necessarily anti-strength and conditioning, but it just seemed very much a world apart from it.
Definitely. I mean, I think the sports science degree, trouble with a sports science degree is so broad. You're covering, yes, there's some S&C in there, and obviously you do a lot of exercise physiology and biomechanics, but then the rest of it is nutrition and psychology, and it's so broad you don't really develop a lot of knowledge about one area. Whereas the strength and conditioning masters, obviously that was much more focused. So the sports science gave me a good kind of background understanding, but then the masters has had much more of an influence on the way I coach and the way I program, because of how much more specific it was. But I think the thing I had to learn, obviously on the masters, when you're learning these things, they're either specific more to sport, like team sports or individual sports, not necessarily CrossFit, which is obviously very different. But also when you're going through all the science behind strength and conditioning, it's also isolated, all the research is very isolated. They might put people through a certain method of strength training, but that's all they're doing for the whole duration of that particular study. So it's a case of, I think I was probably guilty when I first graduated of trying to make my coaching a little bit too sciencey, as opposed to blending together the real life with the science, and understanding that interaction between the two.
You mean you compartmentalize strength development and endurance development, and then sort of, rather than, because I suppose CrossFit does flip it on its head a little bit, that type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously CrossFit, you have to bring everything together, but obviously you've got that interference effect of everything else going on as well. And I think as well, because of that, a research paper into, let's just say, tempo squats, where everything is very controlled in terms of volume, in terms of intensity. If you then try and apply that to CrossFit, where, okay, they might have done their set of squats, but then they've also done loads of wall balls, and there's so many other things going on that you can become a little bit too, you can try and control it too much, which then doesn't necessarily work as well in a CrossFit set. So I learned a lot from that, and then I think, so after that I spent a little bit of time working in the university, kind of on a sports science / strength and conditioning pathway with students. And I think again then, trying to...
You were lecturing?
Yeah, lecturing and leading seminars and things like that.
Do you have to wear a shirt and carry a briefcase around?
Probably, at that point, that was probably the smartest I'd ever dressed on a daily basis in my life. You couldn't wear your Razor Storm gym shorts and your CrossFit t-shirt in there,
Razor Storm, that was that. Oh my God, that takes me back.
Yeah.
Well, with all those elaborate
good times.
Viking logos.
Yeah, exactly. No Lululemon back then.
Fucking hell.
So again, then I guess for me at that point, it was a case of having then experienced the difference between the academic world of strength and conditioning and then the real world of coaching, knowing what the students were likely to head out into. It was a case of trying to bring that together in a more practical way for them, so that when they were working in whatever field they would go on to work in, they could also kind of blend the two together in a much better way. So I enjoyed that for a while, but I think I wanted to get back into coaching myself. I think at that point I probably felt like I wasn't ready to spend the rest of my time in a university setting. I wanted to be doing the real life stuff. So I went back to Abu Dhabi for another couple of years, spent a little bit more time out there, and then came back because of COVID really. And then since then I've been completing a physio degree. So I've got probably another, well, we'll see, in theory 3 months left. Got a placement to finish, a dissertation to finish, and then I'll be trying to bring together obviously physio, doing my online coaching, maybe get back to a little bit of in-person coaching as well, bringing the three together to try and obviously help people obviously with the strength and conditioning stuff, CrossFit stuff, just like I have been, but then also working the physio into that. So kind of trying to work people through that whole pathway of from an injury through what people would see as the classic physio stuff, with your therabands and all that kind of thing, but then actually getting them back to doing what they want to do in a way that is a little bit more, I guess, more of a process, as opposed to just, okay, now your shoulder doesn't hurt when you do external rotation with a TheraBand, now you can go back to do muscle ups. And I think that gap at the moment is just way too big, and people end up re-injuring themselves.
Late
as
stage
opposed to, exactly. So I guess that's where the direction I'll be heading in once I've finished uni.
Yeah, it happens far too often, right? It's like people are, they get their rehab drills, they're told to do this 3 times a week or every day, and then they're like, okay, I can jump back in, and because they rested, it feels okay jumping back in, but then they're just stuck doing banded external rotations on for every single warm up for the rest of their life.
Exactly, it's unnecessary.
All right,
unnecessary.
I'll give my little introduction.
Okay, so go right back to the streets of Bristol.
No, we won't. We'll just let's go to finding CrossFit. So yeah, I was a year ahead of Sam at university, and so a lot of Sam's story, a couple of little things, sort of my story just was like a little bit ahead of that. So I was playing rugby at university, and just, I think at that time, I just noticed, I was becoming a little bit disinterested in rugby. I was enjoying training in the gym more than I was actually doing the rugby. I remember one pre-season, I think I was just more excited about doing the gym work and running the lengths of the pitch, and what else we were doing.
We never lived running, eh?
Yeah, maybe sprints is all right. And then I kept on looking online at just different training methods, and eventually through a number of different things found CrossFit. I think I watched a video it was like a 300 workout done by the Jim Jones sort of crew, who are similar to CrossFit back in the day. I think they were doing it to get the actors for 300 to look the way they did. It's just basically a hard circuit. So I saw that and I was like, right, I need to find a CrossFit gym. And I think I was lucky enough to just look for one. I was like CrossFit in Leeds or CrossFit in Yorkshire or whatever it was, and it was like CrossFit Leeds opening in 2 months' time, and I was on my break at uni at the time, and then I was just looking forward to going back for second year, and I became one of the first members at CrossFit Leeds. And I remember Mike taking me through my first workout. It was 3 rounds for time, 15 push press, 15 kettlebell swings, 15 box jump. I think it was only at like 35 kg, and I was like done. And anyway, I just got hooked on it from the start. Became obsessed with having my initials next to every squat record on the board at CrossFit Leeds. And then I think in my final year, I just started to coach part-time. And I remember just doing, I think it was Sundays, I was doing like a weightlifting class, and I remember taking one morning. And for me, it was just like, I would have done anything just for keys to the gym. And then I graduated and started working as a youth worker in Bradford for a little bit. And then I just came across a job online, which was sort of someone told me about, but it was in the Middle East. It was in Kuwait, and the advert for the job was CrossFit Monster required. And the only sort of prerequisite...
So why did you answer that?
Mate, so the only prerequisite is to have a level 1, and then I end up having some like weird Skype back in those days with like a hiring manager for them, who was sort of like a business consultant. And I remember just going through the thing, and I think that, you know, the pay was like similar to what I was getting at the time. But I think the crux of it was I asked, like, okay, so I have to coach, you know, X amount of classes per week, but can I train twice a day? And it was like, you can train as much as you want to. And I was like, all right, rock on. And that was it. I packed my bags, and then, I left for Q8 and then started coaching there full time. And I was one of the first coaches to go out to the Middle East. And I think sort of within a year of me going out, you know, trendsetter and everything, it all sort of just erupted, especially over in Abu Dhabi and in Dubai. But in Q8, it was a little bit of a slower process. But I think, you know, many people who had like a similar goal of just being able to train more and just sort of live that athlete lifestyle went out to the Middle East. And my sort of coaching at the time, you know, was doing 5 hours back to back for like 6 months straight. But I was training in the morning, taking a break, training later on, and just living it and really enjoying it. And over that time, I started to just help out a group of individuals at the gym who wanted to compete more. So I started writing programming. That then developed into me asking my coach at the time, Andy Edwards. I asked him for a job. I just said, hey, I'm interested in doing some remote coaching. Can I do that if I find a few clients? But we just sort of put them under the umbrella of the, you know, Perpetual Performance, which was his company at the time. I think it was like one of the first remote coaching programming companies out there, or sort of setups out there in the UK. And I did I think at the time he was like, do your OPEX CCP. So I did that, and that was like a real poignant moment in my coaching, because I learnt from James Fitzgerald for 5 days. I think I did a program design course, and it was a coaching course, and it was just, everything came together. You know, I was reading these ebooks on how to develop strength. I had a bit of an idea about how to develop endurance, but I didn't really have a system behind it. And everything sort of just came together, and it was like, all right, this is how you program for mixed modal athletes.
Because your degree was sports coaching, hey?
No, it was sports development. So
okay,
I always had like a general interest in training, but more like, I would say, applied sports science and that type of stuff. But
I always feel like I used to notice it when we were living together. Obviously, you had the sports development / you always had a lot of awareness around like the coaching side of things, and then you would read a lot of the, you know, especially around that time, like say Starting Strength and books like that. Whereas I think I was taking a lot more from university in that sense. So we were both learning from different places in slightly different ways.
Yeah, I would say, if I reflect back on sort of the way I've gone about things, you know, it's weird because I mean, I don't have a personal training qualification. I don't have a sports science degree. So I could rock up at a commercial gym here in Spain. So I could rock up to a commercial gym here and just not have any ability to be able to coach people, but I've been coaching for 15 years. I've sort of gone the route of get your level 1, get your level 2, get your level 3, do a bunch of courses around that, and I've sort of structured my own education through it. But like I was saying, the OPEX program design, the CCP, was like a real point where things did start to click for me. And I know that a lot of people who have done that course and have just gone through the same thing, but you do get the blinkers on a little bit, and you do think, oh, this is the way, you know, and you become a little bit dogmatic about things. But I suppose that's, you know, just like when you start learning about CrossFit, right? You're all about that, you know, 5-5-5, 3-3-3, 1-1-1, and that's all you need to do for your strength work. And then through that time, I started just to pick up a little bit of momentum with remote coaching clients. I moved to a different gym and had a bit more of a personal training focus. I started to work with a few people there. I then was a little bit nomadic for for a bit of time. I went to the US for a little bit, and then eventually came back to the UK in 2017. And over the course of about 2 years, I sort of, where I was working with people one-to-one in different places and also just doing classes, I just started to pick up more clients. And then for about a year, I was in London coaching at CrossFit Perpetua, which is now, I think, is a district. And, you know, that for me And I know a lot of other coaches experienced a bit of a boom in remote coaching, and the gym and the way that it was sort of set up was pretty good for folks who wanted to provide some additional programming or some additional nutrition or personal training and that type of stuff. It wasn't your run-of-the-mill CrossFit box, which was just like, we're just class focused. Then in 2018, I moved to Barcelona, and for the last would be now 7 years, 6-7 years, last 6-7 years, I've just been doing remote coaching online, and I've sort of started to branch out a little bit and started to that very much the type of person I was working with initially was, I want to get better at CrossFit for the Open and this type of thing. And that's just gone through quite a few evolutions to now I'm working with people who are, of all different abilities, but some people are looking to rehab themselves so they can get back into training full time, or they're just looking for a bit of a link. Other people that I work with are just, they know other people I work with and they just have some more individual training goals. I've got to work with a rugby player, I work with a couple of jiu-jitsu athletes as well. And I suppose the thing I like to bring into coaching is, in what I do, is I like to think that I've learnt your more sort of structured way of training people, but as well as that, I do have a bit of CrossFit in me, which is a little bit like, fuck the rules, or not so much like that, but like when you know the rules, you know how to break them, and I suppose that's something I sort of try to bring to my coaching.
I think it's interesting with that though, like obviously, if you think when we first started competing in CrossFit, all your training was very CrossFit, wasn't it? It was very classic. Whereas I think these days, people obviously who are competing in CrossFit, the training's definitely changed in terms of the approach and everything that goes into it. Yeah. To still compete really in the same kind of thing.
Yeah, like I think there's a part of like the way we went through things where, I remember we would follow some sort of loose program. But I remember Thursdays at CrossFit Leeds back in the day were like open gym day, and you'd have all the workouts that were there from the previous few days, so you could catch up on those. But as well as that, people would go in and they would learn skills, and and there would be an element of just like figuring things out. I'm just messing around with butterfly pull-ups for 10 minutes and just try. And it's almost like when you see people practicing, like learning how to skate. There's no EMOMs, there's no drills. It's just like you try to do an ollie over a deck, and then you try to go over 2 decks, and then maybe you find something in between, or then you try a kick flip and it doesn't work, so you try again. And I definitely think there's an element within that style of just sort of play and unstructured practice, and just not necessarily being so worried about the plan, the progression, and all this type of thing. It's definitely something to take from that, and I think CrossFit has flipped a few things on its head.
Definitely. I think if you look at a lot of sports, if you look at even say something like rugby, which obviously really it's only been professional for 30 years in this country? Yeah. If that?
Yeah, 30 years.
And I think if you look at say the England national team now, or even any club team, the number of coaches that they have for kick-in, for defence, attack, forwards coach, backs coach, line-out coach. Yeah. The way that they've taken every individual element of the game and refined it, I think is a natural process as sports develop. But I think
it's also gone full circle a bit. I think it's also gone to the point where they tried to, like you hear of when England won the World Cup, you hear of the coaching setup there, and it's like Clive Woodward got in an eye specialist and this specialist and that specialist, and it's like you can take this real compartmentalized look at things. Yeah. But like you said, I mean, it makes sense they have a coach for every individual thing, because you can win penalties off of scrums and you can win games off of scrums. So let's have a forward like a scrum coach.
Yeah. But then, obviously, with CrossFit as well, like we said before, the way that everything eventually ends up getting blended together. Yeah. Then, like you say, the play element to it, and just exploring movements. Yeah. There's a lot of value in that too.
Yeah, and I think I've worked with a few people who haven't really done enough classes in the past, and the rate limiter with those individuals has been a bit like, hey, you might just need to go out and just get your ass kicked in a few workouts a bit more. Is there a Saturday crew that you can just do a throwdown with, or something along those lines? And I really try to encourage that with my athletes, as but I also understand sometimes athletes will be like, I'm paying X amount for coaching. I want to have this, and they'll have a bias towards that, right? There's a very specific type of person who does get coaching, but there's also another type of person who's just going to, smash themselves doing comp train and not care about it.
But I also think there's a type of person who excels with coaching.
Yeah.
And other people who need to be in classes. And I think if you think for us, coming from rugby backgrounds and just our general interests, when we started competing in CrossFit, we already knew, we might not have known the specifics, but we'd already developed the skill of training.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of people who've perhaps done classes or not done much exercise or sport before CrossFit, they don't necessarily understand how to train alone. Because I think there's a discipline that comes with that. And it's the little things, I guess, that we probably wouldn't even have thought about back then. But it's a case of how you look after yourself around training, what you might be doing to warm up, what you might be doing to cool down, the way you motivate yourself to train is very different when you're training to compete on your own compared to training in a class where you walk in and you're spoon-fed. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I wouldn't take some of the tactics I used at uni to...
No. We've refined things since then. Hey,
pasta lager diet, watch speeches from Any Given Sunday just to get ready for training.
Or you going out the night before an open workout and then throwing up everywhere.
Hey, that happened. There was an open workout. I wouldn't have done that for an open workout. Was it not? No, it did not end well. Anyway, I learned not to have your breakfast an hour before.
Hey everyone, Matt Harvey here. I produced this podcast that you're listening to or watching just now. So if you like the way that it looks and sounds, that's partially down to me. If you've got a podcast, video, or other online project that you'd like some production help with, or even if you just want to chat through some ideas, drop me a DM or an email. My details can be found in the show notes below. Thanks so much for your time. On with the show.
So what we're going to do now is we're just going to segue a little bit, and we're just going to go over sort of just the name of the podcast. So Barbell Strategy, obviously within the name, it sounds a bit CrossFit-y. Strategy, it sounds a bit smart. It sounds like something that a podcast would be called. But there is sort of part of it which I think underpins a lot of our perspective around training, which is Barbell Strategy as a concept, as an idea, comes from Nassim Taleb's book Anti-Fragile, and he talks about it in a few different respects, but mainly in sort of an idea around investing and investing strategy, which is basically putting the majority of your efforts into things which are going to be low risk, and then putting a little bit into high risk. And I think within training, you can think of it in a very similar sense. So the sort of barbell element is, imagine you've got a barbell with 3 20 kilo plates on one side and then 1 10 kilo plate on the other side. From a training perspective, we can look at that heavier loaded side as that's the effort, that's the work that we're going to put into structured training, strength and conditioning ideas we know that work. But then on the other side, that's going to be the stuff which is a little bit higher risk, but it's also a little bit higher payoff. And I think that some of the things that we see in CrossFit, some of those workouts which just don't make sense on paper, but absolutely just provide a very potent stimulus, that's the type of stuff that we would have on the lesser loaded side. So it's those types of things that we want to feed in and thread into your training, but not too much, because we obviously understand we can't do too much of that. So that's going to be a lot of the things that we will talk about on this podcast will sort of come from a little bit of that slant. So we will be trying to sort of relate a lot of the information in the strength and conditioning world, see how that sort of holds up in CrossFit, specifically competitive CrossFit. The structure of the podcast, we will do deep dives into sort of topics. And for the first few podcasts, we're going to talk a lot about our coaching process and what that looks like, just from a more conceptual angle, but at the same time, also chronologically, like what are the first few things that we do with athletes when they start working with us? What do we like to, how do we like to assess them? What are those types of things? So hopefully that can give you a bit of an idea of just how to navigate your training or navigate your coaching, and give you a bit of a journey through that as well. But as well as that, part of the podcast is going to be on question and answers. So we want to make sure that this is something where people are getting the information that they're going to find useful. So we'll be putting out Q&A prompts onto our Instagram, and then hopefully we'll be able to get some good questions from you guys, and then we'll be able to go into them. Some of the questions we'll be able to go into a little bit more detail, and then some of them we will quickly go over. So we'll go into that section of the pod now. So we'll start off with you, Sam. I think you have a question.
Yeah, so I had a question from MJ in Q8 around structuring or how to approach training for masters athletes. And I think it's definitely an interesting question. I think, it's easy to look at everyone who wants to compete in CrossFit in the same way, but I think masters athletes have perhaps a different set of challenges or circumstances compared to what we had when we were 20 years old and just trying to train as hard as we could and make it to regionals. And I think obviously it's important to take those things into account. And I think if you meet a masters athlete or you start talking to a masters athlete around coaching, I think the first kind of thing that you need to establish is where they're at in their kind of training journey. Because I think there's two distinct groups really. You have, I guess, where we're headed, where we're masters athletes who have got a long training history. We've mastered the skills to some degree. We spent a long time.
Wait, what? Have you seen how I move compared to you?
Hey, I was talking about myself.
All right, okay, good. All right.
I just muscle through. You're the Mr. Refined. So you have people like that, and we spent a long time doing strength training and Olympic weightlifting, things like that. And then you have the people who they're masters athletes, but their kind of training age in terms of CrossFit is actually quite young, like as young as some of the younger athletes that we might coach. And I think obviously then those two groups of people have very different approaches. I think with the first group who've been training a long time, then they might have, in certain elements, they might have reached a ceiling. So then we might look at the things where we do still feel like there's room to grow, and then perhaps if we feel like, from a strength and power perspective, generally things that are harder to develop as we get older, then we might focus more on, say, efficiency and kind of technical tweaks to make the most of what they've got.
When you mention reaching a ceiling and what that looks like what are the types of things you're looking for, or what are the types of things that might hint at that?
Yeah, I think there's certain things that you can always improve. I feel like from an aerobic perspective, as we get older, that's something we can continually progress. I think it's the more explosive side of training. So obviously like the strength, power development, the short 2-3 minute metcons where we might find that we progress either less or kind of stop being able to develop. And I think the way I would look for that is obviously you can see it in strength numbers. And some people, they can keep developing their strength, but other people, it doesn't really matter kind of what approach you take. They are just at a ceiling with that.
Yeah.
I think that's a kind of a big telltale sign for me. And I think also as well within that, it's looking at how well they can recover from intensity. Because I think, again, as a masters athlete, especially recovery is a big thing. Like I noticed that even in myself, the way I would have recovered 10 years ago compared to now has definitely changed. And I think then that's something else that you have to consider when you're designing programs for masters athletes. And I think that, I noticed that in myself, who has a job that gives me the flexibility to be able to manage my recovery. I've got no kids. I get a good night's sleep at night. I can eat well. If you then take a masters athlete who has 2 kids, a busy job, a relationship to maintain, all that kind of stuff, there's so much extra stress that's going to inhibit their recovery.
Yeah.
That again, that's something which we need to think about when we're setting their training cycle or training program and planning that around competition. And then obviously as well, then you've just got, again, master athletes, there tends to be perhaps an injury or injuries that have affected them over time, especially in CrossFit. We get the typical overuse stuff, your tendinitises, things like that, which if they've become chronic, require, realistically, it's a management thing as opposed to it's going to get better kind of thing. So there's things like that we need to consider. And then, like I say, then obviously on the flip side, then you've got the masters who they're relatively new to CrossFit as a training methodology. They might not have done a huge amount of training full stop up to this point. And I think with those guys, then there's still probably, there is more room for them to develop the things like the strength and the technique. Obviously the technique is a big thing because the chances are they might not have done much of the technical side of things before.
Mm-hmm.
So it's slightly different approaches as to what we're expecting to get and how we're going to program for that, depending on where they're coming from and depending on all those other variables that they have going on in their life compared to a 20-year-old,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think as well, one of the things that can be with like a small little tactic, which I've found to be helpful, is just using variation, because I just think that doing the same variations of movements and working on the same progressions for 5 weeks at a time or something like that, sometimes that can just take a little bit too much out of sort of soft tissue and cause people just to get little niggles and that type of thing. So making them go through more variations or more iterations and cycle through that, I think can be quite helpful as well.
Yeah, and I think the variations we can use to dictate in some ways the intensity of their training.
Yeah, 100%.
There's certain, say, squat variations that are going to be a lot more taxing than others.
Yeah. Okay, so for the next question, we'll go through one from, so this is from Enrique, and he asked how to do an unloading phase or how to perform that. So unloading phase, deloading. So I'm going to go over sort of 2 examples really. I think first of all, if you're training and if you're just sort of training for health, if you're doing just CrossFit classes, in this situation actually, so Enrique is he goes to the Jiu-Jitsu academy that I go to. I'll also speak to that. If you're just doing, Jiu-Jitsu a few times a week and you're training a couple of times a week, I don't necessarily think you need to be doing a deloading phase because I think they'll just naturally happen. It could be end of the financial year, so all of a sudden you're getting hammered at work, so you're going to take a couple of days off training. It could be that you get sick. It could be that you're going on holiday. It could be that something changes in your schedule or something like that, and all of a sudden you're taken away from training for a few days. And I think that those times when you are forced to rest, I think in a sense that they can act a little bit as like a physical deload. What I would say is the couple of situations where you might want to implement a deload in that situation is where if someone does actually take forced rest away from training, but they end up creating a lot of stress because, they're hammering themselves. They're going away for a work trip for a week. They haven't trained at all, but they've been absolutely hammering work for that week whilst they've been away. I think in that situation, you're just taking one stress away from the training and you're adding another bit of stress from something else. I think, okay, that's probably where that method isn't necessarily going to work. And I think when that sort of situation of just letting it happen might not work is also when you just get bored of training and you might just want to mix it up and just change it up and be like, okay, I'm gonna change the squat variation I've been doing for the last 8 weeks or something like that. Or you might just need to take like a bit of an easier week, change it up. I think sometimes adding just variation and training at a pretty similar intensity but using somewhat like limiting variations, as you mentioned before, Sam, I think that can work pretty well. And then the other situation would be more to do with people who are competing and going through training which does require some form of deload. And traditionally it's sort of, okay, we're going to be working through this type of progression, or we're going to be using this tool in our training, therefore we are going to do this over 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is. And I think what that can often do is it just sort of boxes people in to a certain style of programming. And I'll be honest with you, most coaches they may plan to go out and write their training like, we're going to deload in 6 weeks time or something like that. But to be honest with you, it might be that person ends up having to take a couple of days off here or whatever. It will change. Or even if they do complete those 5 weeks and deload on the 6th week, I bet you that just changes in 6 months' time as well. And maybe they're not going through that. So one of the ways which I've played around with, which I find far more effective, is just basically finding a bit of an individual time for that athlete. Like, how long does it take for them to get bored? How long does it take for them to start to show signs of being, like just overreaching? So it could be they get sick, their elbow issue crops up again, that knee issue crops up again. And if you see not even that, I say if you see about 2 or 3 of those types of things going on at the same time, probably means their training is overreaching them. And obviously you can refer back to their feedback, you can refer back to their numbers and see how they're doing. And then also just seeing negative performances in training. So, all right, after 4 weeks, you can't really continue to add, like the 0 to 2 kilos and perform the same training piece, or you can't really continue with those negative splits on your intervals. So in that situation, you can just start to guesstimate, okay, after 4 weeks of training, you start to either get bored, get sick and ill, or have recovery issues, or your training isn't necessarily moving in the direction we want it to. So let's go through a transition week. And the transition week would be more like a week 0. So it's not a deload week, which is typically do the same things, reduce the volume, reduce the intensity. It would be more of okay, well, the next block is going to have all these exercises in. So we'll take a week where you might do a few different things, but you're also going to be doing a few things from the block you're just about to go into. But we're just going to, be chill with the prescription. You're not going heavy. You're just getting familiar with the exercises. You're getting familiar with the intervals and the style of the workout. And then when you go into week 1, you're already at a point in your training where you know what to expect, you know what's coming up, and you're able to tackle it with a bit of a reference point. And I think that sometimes just like flipping from one training block into a completely different thing on the next training block isn't super helpful. So you want to keep some things somewhat consistent there, because you can keep that momentum going, but having like a week as a bit of a bridge in the middle can be good. And also think that keeping the prescription pretty loose and letting the athlete just, go by feel, and sometimes actually giving them things which they cannot go hard on, right? Like, hey, I want you to do this circuit and I want you to listen to a podcast whilst you do it, so you're not going to blow up. But yeah, I think that often we talk about deloading and unloading as, it's very much coming from a training perspective of we need to rest the body from all of this acute stress that's going on. But I'm a big believer in getting athletes to be engaged in their training, and sometimes I might get athletes just to work the same sort of structure, very similar, for 3 weeks. I know they're going to get bored after that, so we say, okay, 3rd week, go for it, and then we transition. They work through a week 0, they get familiar with it, 3 hard weeks, and then we transition. And I think keeping athletes engaged and keeping it fresh can be important, and sometimes that can be particularly good with coaches, because I also know that coaches get coached so they can get some ideas from stuff, and if they're just constantly going through the same things, sometimes that can be a bit, if you're looking to get that out of your training, it can be a bit boring. But I will say, if someone is really locked in on their training goals, if you've got someone who's like, I want to go to, I don't know, who knows with the current situation with the competitive landscape, maybe they want to be able to compete at like SID at the RX or the elite level, and like they're really locked in on it. I'd say in those situations you just got to be like, hey, well, sorry if you're bored, but you want to do a boring sport, and this is the thing you need to be better at.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Like generally, though, when obviously we've always predominantly coached people on more of a one-to-one basis.
Yeah.
And I think having that individual flexibility with everybody is quite a big thing, because I think it's very easy to lay out a plan for a year with this is when you'll have your deload, whatever. Mate, this is when you're going to compete.
The amount of times I've written one of those annual plans, and like after the first month,
it goes out the window.
Yeah, it can be a good thought experiment, but I think from just a practical application, it's shit.
That's it, because I think, like you say, we might need to deload sooner. It might be that something's working really well, in which case we carry on. But it might also be that you've got this plan and all of a sudden, with 2 weeks notice, an athlete decides, they've been invited to do this team competition that they're going to go and do. And that can completely change things.
Yeah.
So there's all these different variables which I think dictate that you have to be flexible. I know obviously you said about looking at numbers and how they're progressing over a cycle. Have you ever used any other kind of measures to help you decide when someone might need a deload?
Yeah, so I've gone through things where I get them to give me a daily score on several different things, and that's gone from like mood, energy, stress, this, that, and then I just started saying, give me a daily score, 0 to 5. How do you feel going into the day? And then sometimes I ask them to, sometimes they do it retroactively. I also have a weekly check-in, so I just send out like a Google sheet, which is they fill in the form, and I'm able to have a look at things. It is obviously retroactively, but I'm able to look at things and try to notice patterns and that type of stuff. But yeah, decreasing performances, subjective feedback. I have like looked at, like, some people just post their like Whoop stuff and all this type of stuff. I have looked at it, but my experience using those things is that they're just not very good measures. I've gone through, I used, what's his name? The Joel someone, he had a HRV thing. I used that for a while. That was probably better than the Whoop, but it was like a little bit messy, but I think the subjective feedback can be a good one.
Yeah, definitely. I think the subjective is a big thing, but I think that's where, again, working with people one-to-one, so much of it comes down to building a good working relationship.
Yeah.
Because the people who are very actively engaged, give you lots of feedback, make it really easy for you to get that information, will make that process so much easier. And generally I find they're the ones who get the most out of their coaching.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Versus the people who either say very little or you have to constantly chase them for things.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
Then obviously, it's very different. That's a lot more difficult to have that kind of understanding and flexibility and awareness as to where they're at with that kind of thing,
Yeah, I think what are some of the things that you use from like more of what are some of the things you would start to notice if you're potentially like overreaching? I've got a funny one. It's, the England rugby team do those grip tests before they train, right? And then people do the jump test. Mine is the toothbrush test, all right? So if I wake up in the morning and I feel like shit and I brush my teeth, I just notice like how I hold my toothbrush, and like not necessarily like it's too heavy to hold, but when I'm just smashed from training, I'll brush my teeth and I'm like, oh my god, I'm like, this is like an effort.
If I think back to when I was training, when I was doing 5-6 hours a day of training, and you would get to a day and just holding anything, you would feel difficult. You'd have like pins and needles, or I'd have like pins and needles in my forearms and things like that. And that was always a big sign for me personally. I think with clients, I've used things, especially after finishing my masters, I use things like counter movement jumps as a measure, which I'm not sure how sensitive it really is. And obviously then for a person, if they've got an hour and a half to train and you're asking them to faff around and measure their jump height and things, it's not necessarily super practical. Versus, when you see it in professional sports teams, they've got a sports scientist stood there on a force plate measuring everybody, off you go, next person. It's very different. I've used like Whoop, but again, Whoop provides some interesting information. Again, accuracy, you never really know. I think the thing with Whoop is people ask, they ask, is it worth me getting a Whoop? And my response is always, well, are you going to listen to it? Because if you're going through the week and you've got 5 days a week that you can train, that you've got the time to train, and if one of those days your Whoop says you're 10% recovered and you definitely shouldn't train, but you've got nowhere else to fit that into your week, then what are you going to do? Are you going to listen to your Whoop and rest, even though that might mean sacrificing a session, or are you going to carry on anyway? And I think, if you're going to carry on anyway, then what's the point of even having the Whoop?
I did use it for like a year. I picked up a couple of good things from it. One was my sleep is very effective if I have like a variable wake up time. So I think I was like doing a bit of coaching in the mornings, and then I just sort of found that like I think it was around 6:30 was like a good wake up time for me. I would score well, but at the same time I was like, Yeah, but on the days I don't actually have to wake up that early, like maybe I want to wake up at 7, and maybe I want to wake up at 7:30. Okay, I get a worse score on my Whoop or whatever. And the other thing I picked up from it was alcohol. So like just having a drink, that would affect my sleep like a lot, and I just didn't realize how much it affected my sleep. But it's funny because it's just there were certain times when I knew I was going to get, I don't know, I think maybe I caught an overnight flight or something like that, and it was like, your Whoop is at 1% score, and I was like, yeah, I was expecting that. But the day-to-day sort of variance and sort of using it to navigate training is a bit, I'm not sure it's the best.
Yeah.
But
no.
let's finish off with our quick fire question and opportunity to make some hot takes. So I think, because this is the second time we tried to do this episode, so we'll try to remember the question. But I think the question was, do you know who it was from as well?
Yeah, it's from Connor in Chester.
Okay. So I think the question was, do you think gyms cave at the pressure of focusing on hard conditioning, doing fun WODs and that type of stuff, versus focusing on the fundamentals? So, what do you reckon?
That was me. I think it all comes down to the gym owner or head coach who's making these programming decisions. I think I've definitely seen it, but then I've also seen it on the flip side where the owner has led the decision to just do hard workouts every day because they think that's what the members want, which it might be. And then I've obviously seen other owners who are very disciplined in terms of they have a structure that they think is for the long-term benefit of the members, and they stick to that structure. And I think what generally happens over time is you attract or you retain the members who are aligned with what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
If you're someone who's just trying to hammer people every day, you will attract people eventually who want to be hammered every day. And if you're someone who wants to develop people in, let's just call it a sustainable way and look after them, then you'll attract those people who enjoy that side of it. I think that's what I've seen. So it's not just the members who want hard workouts. Sometimes it comes from the owners as well.
I think it comes from the owners.
Yeah.
I think once that pressure is there to keep the sort of number of members up and hit your numbers to make money, I've definitely seen it. Well-intentioned owners of gyms who were previously coaches, and they'll be able to quote off all the Greg Glassman quotes and everything.
Yeah.
And then there will come a time when maybe they open up a class and it's called Sweat, or they're trying to do some shitty version of Barry's boot camp in a CrossFit gym or something like that. and yeah, I've seen that a few times, and then they de-affiliate or something like that.
Yeah.
And
how much, not obviously this is not a sweeping statement, but have you ever come across people where you think you're just making the classes this way because it's easier for you?
100%.
Setting people off to do a 40-minute AMRAP with low skill movements where you just press the timer and then wander around the gym for 40 minutes is way easier than teaching someone how to snatch or clean or do muscle ups.
Yeah, I've had it as well when I've been doing affiliate programming, and I tell you what, that's like the most annoying thing to do, because it's not only like when you're working one-to-one, you have an opinion on the program, the other person has an opinion on the program. It's pretty easy to manage. Okay, you have a conversation. With a CrossFit gym or whatever you're doing, a gym programming, the programmer has their opinion, the owner has their opinion, the coaches, the people delivering the classes have their opinion, all the members have their opinion, and then you have all of the interactions amongst everyone, and it's like it's hard to manage. And I've had it before where I'll coach something, I'll write a program around something, I'll even give all of the stuff like, okay, you're going to do, snatch for however long, and then the workout is going to be Helen, which is a 10-minute work, roughly, let's call it around 10 minutes. And I know a lot of people in the CrossFit world, they give this example, right? But like, you give them all of the examples of like how to do this, what's the scale, what's the warm-up rounds you're going to do, everything like that. But then it's like, yeah, that's too hard. We'd just rather do like a 40-minute EMOM. Can I just, set up the circuit, show the exercises, 3, 2, 1, go, a couple of high fives along the way, good job, put on your favorite playlist. Like, fuck that. Come on, man.
It happens though. If that was me, I just get bored. It is literally, it's like being back in David Lloyd, taking a circuit class when you're 18. There's very low skill involved. And I think you lose a lot of opportunity to interact with the members as well, because you can't interact with them when they're in the middle of a 40-minute workout. Whereas if you're going through some snatch progressions, you have all the technical chat, but inevitably within that, there's a little bit of social chat as well. And it creates a nice environment.
Yeah. It's like administering a class rather than coaching the class. I think that's...
Yeah.
But, right, well, I think my battery is about to go on. But I think we are coming up to the hour mark, so we're going to wrap it up there. But I should do a podcast every day because I have drunk a litre of water in the last hour. So this is my trick to keeping my hydration levels up. But who knows when this will be going out, but the cadence of the podcast will be weekly. So we'll be coming out with a podcast every single week. We'll be doing a deep dive, bit of question and answer, maybe a couple of hot takes, but make sure you do the podcast thing, which is to like and subscribe wherever you are, watching this, listening to this, or whatever it is, and give us 5 stars. I think, probably only our mums are going to be listening to this first episode, but hopefully there are some other people who are listening and appreciating our insights and hot takes. But anyway, thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you on the next one.